Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order is here, and it's such a good game. Whether it's the satisfying combat, branching level design, or the story you can actually care about, there's no shortage of reasons why Jedi Fallen Order is a fantastic game. If it weren't for the performance issues, this would easily be contending for my personal Game of the Year 2019. The story surrounding Jedi Fallen Order revolves around how we finally got a good Star Wars game, after suffering dud after dud for years and years and years.
More importantly to me, the spotlight deserves to be on Respawn.
This studio has been putting out quality products for years, and they just don't get enough credit. I wanted to highlight Respawn, their brilliant game design, and how they proved themselves once again despite the odds. Before we talk about Jedi Fallen Order, let's look at the larger context of making a Star Wars game. The recent history of Star Wars video games is rocky to say the very least, but the entire history dates back longer than some of us have been alive. It started with Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back in 1982, a 2D side-scroller where you blasted AT-ATs on Hoth. After a handful more games in the 80s, we got a ton of Star Wars titles throughout the 90s. Highlights include Dark Forces, which introduced jumping and free aiming to the FPS genre. TIE Fighter let you have dogfights in space and apparently still holds up well. Episode 1 Racer managed to be awesome despite the absolute dumpster fire that was Episode 1 The Phantom Menace. The 2000s is really when Star Wars games hit their stride. Republic Commando is credited for delivering innovative tactical FPS gunplay for its time. The Battlefront series earned its popularity with huge, sprawling maps and seemingly endless large-scale battles. Knights of the Old Republic 2 firmly established its claim even to this day as one of the best RPGs ever created. The LEGO Star Wars franchise also began during this era, kicking off a series of endless sequels. The Force Unleashed games showed us what it felt like to have satisfying lightsaber combat and Force abilities in third person. This is the closest Star Wars has ever come to feeling the way it does in Jedi Fallen Order.
Now let's look at the last 10 years.
BioWare put out The Old Republic in 2011, which took on the MMO space and is still humming to this day with a decently active player base. Then we had Kinect Star Wars. Remember when Xbox desperately pushed the Kinect and ultimately damaged their brand and reputation because of it? Well, a big part of that started back on the 360 with Kinect Star Wars, which had 4 minigames that included lightsaber combat, pod racing, and a Just Dance ripoff called Galactic Dance-Off. It featured Han Solo dancing to Bruno Mars and Gwen Stefani's Hollaback Girl rewritten as Hologram Girl. I don't even have to tell you how this thing turned out. Battlefront 2015 is really where the shit hit the fan. The game was visually stunning on EA's Frostbite engine, but that's all you could write home about. Sure, it felt like a Star Wars game, but it famously launched without Galactic Conquest, which is one of the biggest reasons people fell in love with Battlefront in the first place. Reportedly, this was to make sure it released at the same time as The Force Awakens, and it really came at a cost. The game felt thin on content and launched with a $50 season pass, asking players to pay for things that should have been in the game in the first place. The legacy of Battlefront 2015 is that it cut corners, delivered a bare-bones casual experience, and cost an arm and a leg to play all of its content. EA's CFO Blake Jorgensen said it best when he admitted the game was designed for those new to FPS games instead of fans of the original Battlefront series.
We heard it straight from the horse's mouth. The intention was never to make this game for hardcore audiences. It was to bank on casual players who didn't know any better.
Battlefront 2 in 2017 represented an opportunity for EA and DICE to get it right, to earn back the faith of its fans and of the larger gaming community. Instead, it betrayed what little trust anyone still had in the franchise. During the beta, people realized that the game was littered with pay-to-win loot boxes and a progression system designed to encourage microtransactions. One of the biggest headlines was that it took 40 hours of playtime to unlock Darth Vader. 40 hours. EA defended their decision on Reddit, claiming it gave players, quote, a sense of pride and accomplishment to spend that much time to unlock him. And we all know how that turned out. This remains the single most downvoted comment in Reddit history. They ended up disabling MTX on launch, and EA lost $3 billion in stock value after the fallout.
Thinking back, while this was probably the absolute worst thing to happen for Star Wars games, it was probably the best thing for consumers in the long run. EA made an example out of themselves and showed the larger gaming community just how bad predatory gambling mechanics can be in a video game. I have to think that this debacle is one of many reasons why we've seen loot boxes wane in popularity over the last few years.
With all of that in mind, it's more than understandable that people were skeptical about Jedi Fallen Order. I mean, how could you not be? Unless you were knocked out and in a coma from 2012 to 2019, you were expecting Jedi Fallen Order to flat out suck. It was supposed to have loot boxes, microtransactions, season passes with DLC that should have been there in the first place. It was supposed to fall short of any expectations you might have had. The reality was that putting out a great Star Wars game in 2019, no matter the developer, was a hard proposition. And who better to take on that challenge than Respawn? In 2016, we learned that Stig Asmussen, who worked on the original God of War trilogy and the famed star of the Art Institute commercials on G4, was leading a team to develop a third-person action-adventure title in the Star Wars universe. Respawn enlisted a narrative team led by Aaron Contreras, who was responsible for the story in Mafia 3, and Chris Avallone, whose resume earns him universal respect. At EA Play 2018, the title of Jedi Fallen Order was revealed, and the release target was set for fall 2019. At this point, skepticism was not only expected, it was natural. And it didn't really wear off until press reviews started rolling in. People loved what they played and had high hopes for the rest of the game. And fortunately, they were right. Jedi Fallen Order is a great game, and Respawn Entertainment pulled it off. EA managed to release a fully featured retail product without controversy, without microtransactions, without any major issues to speak of, save for some performance problems.
It's easily one of the biggest surprises of the year for me. Let's talk about why it's so great. I'm 20 hours in and it's absolutely crushing every single expectation I had for it.
After the Battlefront reboots, I expected Jedi Fallen Order to be fairly vanilla. Those games felt safe, and this game bucks that trend entirely. Jedi Fallen Order shares a lot of DNA with many action-adventure third-person titles that have released over the past several years. God of War, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, you've probably heard the comparisons, and they're entirely accurate. There's a perception that this is a negative, that Jedi Fallen Order doesn't reinvent the wheel of the formula that those games use to succeed. Honestly, I couldn't care less, because the execution is incredible. Games don't have to be revolutionary to be great. That's a steep bar that we set on almost every game that comes out these days. This isn't a concession for Jedi Fallen Order, it's just a reality. It takes the core gameplay loop, fashions it to be Star Wars, and sends you on your way. One of my favorite parts of Jedi Fallen Order is how difficult it is. I'm playing on Jedi Grandmaster because I hate myself. Just kidding, I loved Bloodborne and Sekiro, and I wanted that same rush of satisfaction from accomplishing what feels impossible.
Before you chirp at me in the comments about how Dark Souls is harder, yeah, of course it is. But the reward loop in Jedi Fallen Order scratches that same itch in my brain all the same.
It beats you down, it makes you look like a fool, and through excellent combat design and pacing, you learn how to overcome that. Beating a tough encounter after 10 or more tries is easily one of the most rewarding feelings I've taken away from a video game. Full stop. Period. It's that good. The structure of Jedi Fallen Order is unmistakably inspired by the Soulsborne games. No matter the difficulty, it's all about checkpoints. Surviving a set of enemies and challenges between meditation points is the name of the game. And I love it. It forces you to think twice about soldiering on to the next checkpoint because you never know what's going to be around the corner. And just like in Dark Souls, you lose your experience if you die and you can't recover it on your next life.
I'm usually super impatient when it comes to video games. Just get me to the next objective so I can get on with my life.
But not in Jedi Fallen Order. I'm as patient as they come because the game requires it, and I enjoy it more as a result. Not every game that mimics this gameplay loop actually pulls it off. Jedi Fallen Order backs it up with impeccable combat design. Battling enemies with the lightsaber is so damn fun thanks to the incredible animation work. It feels smooth and satisfying. I thought Battlefront's saber combat in the hero modes felt good, and this blows that out of the water. Timing is the most important aspect here, as enemies come at you with blasters, batons, and sabers relentlessly. Opponents in most video games are typically patient. They take turns at trying to kill you. That is not the case here, and most of the time you're outnumbered, which changes your strategy completely. I can think of countless scenarios where I thought there is no freaking way I have this fight, only to reach into my toolbox of Jedi moves and come out victorious. It might take a few tries, but I get better every single time. Each individual enemy pushes you to approach combat differently, even down to the insect creatures that seem like pushovers. As you progress and gain more abilities, most games get easier. Jedi Fallen Order has a tendency to make you feel powerful and then knock you straight back down to earth. You're always facing tougher enemies with different movesets. Just when you think the answer is to use that powerful new heavy combo on everything that moves, it's actually the most basic moveset you were taught in the first few hours of the game. And the result is that combat feels fresh and exciting more than a dozen hours in. It's absolutely brilliant.
The single most surprising aspect of Jedi Fallen Order for me is the level design.
Generally, I think we expected to play a linear game with a single path to our destination, and that's simply not the case. The playable space across several planets is sprawling, with multiple paths branching to different areas. I was consistently shocked at just how many zones exist in each destination. And as a serial search in every corner for every single item type of gamer, I found value in each section. My one gripe was that I'd often come across a blocked passage that would later open up after I gained a new ability, but that's something that every game with this kind of level design does, and it didn't bother me to the point of disrupting the experience. I'm a sucker for platforming, and this game has plenty of obstacles and jumping puzzles. It's one of gaming's oldest mechanics, and yet using the Force to slow down objects, climbing viney walls, and cutting ropes to open up shortcuts is a blast all the same. Most of the time, I hate puzzles, because remember, I'm impatient, but the puzzles in Jedi Fallen Order seem to have hit a sweet spot of challenge and a reasonable solve time. We haven't even talked about the story yet, and this is the first time I've cared about story in Star Wars outside of the movies. It's thanks to the brilliant narrative team and wonderful performances throughout. Cutscenes are risky business if there's no emotional investment or connection, especially when they last a few minutes each. This game manages to deliver there. It makes me care about Cal and his quest to revive the Jedi Order. And the more I play, the more I realize it's because most of these characters feel real. They have faults. Those faults are revealed and confronted, and then they're overcome. It would have been easy to make everyone in a Star Wars game perfect, faultless, but they're not, and the story is better for it. Also, BD1. The bond between Cal and BD1 is heartwarming and reminded me of pilot Jack Cooper's connection with his Titan BT in Titanfall 2. It's clear that Respawn knows how to craft a relationship between a human and a robot companion.
Suffice it to say, I really love this game. I think it's well executed in concept and design, and it delivers on many levels that I appreciate as a gamer. We talked about the run-up to release and how difficult it was for Jedi Fallen Order to succeed, but we haven't taken the time to focus specifically on Respawn the studio. This is a moment we should all remember, even more than the quality of the game itself, because Respawn Entertainment is a fantastic developer that deserves all the credit in the world for this game.
Shinobi on Twitter pointed out that Respawn has released 4 games this generation, which all received mid-80s scores on Metacritic.
You'd be hard-pressed to find a developer that's pulled that off with the level of quality that Respawn has. Most people should realize by now it's a miracle to put out a video game, much less one that functions properly and is really good. In some ways it feels like Respawn parted the Red Sea with this one, but in reality they've been consistently great for years, and it's time that we give them the credit that they've earned. Against all odds, Jedi Fallen Order is a wonderful experience that I won't soon forget, and I can't wait to dive back in and finish this thing, although I fully expected to kick my ass for a dozen hours or more.